All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. This is going to be a different type of edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. Because if you listen to the beginning of every one of our broadcasts, we always say, welcome to the latest edition. When in fact, this will also be the last edition of 2020. For we have a full calendar year under our belt. When we created Chin Check Radio, it was done in the summer of 2019. So we pretty much have been at this for about a year and a half. So we have a full calendar year under our belt, coming to you with topics that we enjoy talking about, topics that we love to share with you all. Again, we said this before, we're not in this to make money off of YouTube. We're just simply showing and sharing our knowledge with professional sports, things like football, boxing, the Dallas Cowboys, as well as other issues in professional sports that I don't feel that the mainstream media covers, or in some cases flat out ignores or tells a different side of the story. So I told myself that since I had an issue with the mainstream sports media, instead of complaining about it or going on Twitter like the majority of people do, and there's nothing wrong with Twitter, it's good advertisement, but I do feel that sometimes we have the equipment now to create one's own platform of media. Obviously, if you look on YouTube, you can find an infinite number of channels. And we know we're just a small portion of the YouTube world, but just the fact that we're here doing what we do, simply just sharing our love and our passion with pro sports or few professional sports, as well as contemporary issues that we find in sports that we feel that we definitely need to cover, as well as the year 2020 dragging us out of our comfort zone with what we normally talk about, to talk about social and racial issues. And we're definitely going to cover all that in this last edition of the year 2020. So let's open up with some of the things we talked about this year. We felt that we had to do a program showing our respect and reverence for former heavyweight champion of the world, Larry the Eastern Assassin Holmes. And it was something that when I watched an episode of the Colin Cowherd show, when he tried to use a football analogy, and in using a football analogy or using a boxing analogy on professional football, we didn't agree with the comments that was made about Larry Holmes. And we had a serious issue with that because Larry Holmes is really disrespected when you think of all-time great heavyweights, because unfortunately he came after the Muhammad Ali era, and of course the late Muhammad Ali was an icon, charismatic, and Holmes was simply a lunch pail type of fighter. Beat all the fighters in the 80s, beat everybody of his era, did what he was supposed to do, was a long-reigning champion, a dominant champion, and still gets overlooked. Because you generally hear, when you hear great heavyweight champions of all time, of course you have Jack Johnson, Ali, Jack Dempsey, some people throw in Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, and I think Holmes, Rocky Marciano. So Holmes tends to get pushed down, but I think in any mythical matchup or fantasy matchup, Holmes would probably be favored in a lot of those fights. So we just wanted to give our respects to Larry Holmes, and when we got in contact with Larry Holmes, well, we reached out to him via Twitter. He seemed to like the program. So that's something, again, us as huge boxing fans, us training boxing, knowing the hard work that goes into that sport, knowing that what these guys put their bodies through, the training, the dieting, and the discipline to even step into the ring, putting their health at risk, their lives at risk, and to even exceed at a high level, and especially in the case of Larry Holmes, I mean, we're talking his second most title defenses of a heavyweight champion. It definitely says a lot about this guy, his longevity, his commitment to excellence, even as an older guy, even turning back the hands of time and beating younger opponents. So that's something where we definitely wanted to pay our respect to Larry Holmes, and we're definitely proud to change that narrative a little bit. Even some people who listen to the program really never heard of Larry Holmes or wasn't too familiar with him because, again, he's constantly pushed to the back of the pack when you think of all-time great heavyweights. So that's something that we definitely wanted to cover and something that we just couldn't let those comments go and not say anything about it. Another story we covered was former Dallas Cowboy head coach Jimmy Johnson getting his honor into the Football Hall of Fame. And till this day, Dallas Cowboys fans still miss Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson is the ultimate what if. Jimmy Johnson is the ultimate if he would have stayed in Dallas. Even though that Cowboys dynasty had 3 Super Bowls, 2 under Johnson, 1 under head coach Barry Switzer. So really, he was an architect of the dynasty. The last time the Cowboys went to the Super Bowl, and it was 3 of them. People often wonder if Jimmy Johnson would have stayed as the head coach, how many more Super Bowls would the Cowboys have? Would they possibly have been, we're talking New England Patriots, territory with those 6 championships in X amount of years? Now, I don't think Johnson would have stayed as long as Bill Belichick like he has in New England, but it does make you wonder for that time, that era, the way Johnson had the team ready to play, the way he knew how to evaluate talent and pick players and remove players who were not productive. It always makes you wonder, and we were proud to see Jimmy get his induction. We kind of felt it was long overdue. But definitely for his contributions, for the trade of Herschel Walker to, with all those draft picks and drafting the Kevin Smiths and the Darren Woodsons and the Emmitt Smiths and just signing quality players to turn around a team that when he got there was a losing franchise, first year 1-15, and to build that team up from 1989 going 1-15 to winning the Super Bowl 4 years later was really a meteoric rise and something that was really never seen before in pro football. And Jimmy Johnson absolutely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Definitely love to see him broadcasting on Fox NFL Sunday, which I don't see him as much anymore. But definitely we enjoy Jimmy. We respect Jimmy for everything that he's meant to the Cowboys organization. Why he's not in the Ring of Honor is really beyond me. And to this day, Cowboys fans still blame Jerry Jones for running Jimmy out the door, for making a comment that Jimmy could have done what 500 coaches could have done, or something to the effect of 500 coaches could have done what Jimmy did, and Jimmy got fed up and really couldn't take Jerry's ego for his one need to take all the credit for the dynasty. And you see the end result where I think short term, Jerry looked good because he did win the Super Bowl with Barry Switzer. So on the one hand, he was correct that any coach could have won with the talent that Jimmy put together. But if anything, that was cutting your nose off to spite your face, because the Cowboys, since that last NFC Championship game when they played in Super Bowl 30, the Cowboys have not even gone past the divisional round since that time. And by the way, that was back in 1995 and 1996. My freshman year in high school. So that's a problem, but we definitely wanted to show our respect to Jimmy Johnson, his long-awaited induction into the Hall of Fame. Definitely one of the all-time great coaches. Now, he doesn't have the longevity as like a Parcells and some of these other guys, but for what he accomplished in Dallas, winning 2 Super Bowls, even making the Miami Dolphins a relevant, or for his time there, a playoff team, really says a lot about this guy. And coach, well deserved you being in the Football Hall of Fame. And the sad news was the unfortunate loss of NBA legend Kobe Bryant. That was very hard getting through that broadcast because the manner in which he died with his daughter, and I think even when I was doing the broadcast, we hadn't had all the facts yet, and even more facts came out where he was with his daughter, and it's just sad all around. Where the day he died, I remember my buddy had sent me the text that Kobe had died, and I couldn't believe it. And of course, as it hit the news wire, it just took over the entire Sunday. And it's still heartbreaking to see him go, or to see him gone, I should say. And definitely Kobe will be missed. When you see Shaquille O'Neal wailing, crying his eyeballs out. Even despite their differences, he knew what Kobe meant to him and his career. I think, and we mentioned before, Kobe was kind of sandwiched between the Michael Jordan era and the LeBron James era. I think Kobe gets overlooked in the GOAT discussion, and he should be there. Now, this is not to talk about whether it's Michael or LeBron, but Kobe definitely deserves to be in the GOAT discussion. He definitely should be in your top 10 NBA players of all time. Just to my eyes and the eyeball test, seeing the two of them play, Kobe Bryant, in terms of style and play, is the closest thing to Michael Jordan. So we definitely had to do a tribute to Kobe on that. It's almost been a year already. Just sad, funny how time flies, but sad, nonetheless. And of course, his wife, Vanessa, is left raising their other children, losing a husband, losing a daughter. So we still, even though it's almost been a year later, but we still extend our well wishes to the Bryant family. The New York Giants had a retirement of one Eli Manning. And we did a broadcast on the book of Eli Manning and his chapters, making the case whether he's a Hall of Famer or not. If you look at the numbers aren't the greatest in the world. However, he has 2 Super Bowls and went through 2 magical Super Bowl runs. Oh, and by the way, he beat Tom Brady not once but twice. And on one of those Super Bowl wins was beating the undefeated New England Patriots, who was rampaging the league. So for Giants fans, and you see the end result where y'all couldn't wait to get Eli out the door, and you see what you have now. So just throwing it out there for all you Giants fans. You guys couldn't wait to get Eli out the door, and look at what you're with now. So, and the guy won you 2 Super Bowls. So definitely had to cover Eli. Of course, growing up in the New York, New Jersey area, we got to watch Eli firsthand, as well as being a Cowboys fan. Of course, the battles between him and Tony Romo. So we definitely got to see it. We have our respect for Eli Manning, winning 2 Super Bowls, beating, as many people think, the greatest quarterback of all time. We then covered the 30th anniversary of probably the biggest upset in professional sports. Undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Mike Tyson, versus James Buster Douglas. And we named that the defeat of Godzilla. Ladies and gentlemen, understand something. The Mike Tyson who fought Roy Jones, and we're going to cover that later on. Mike Tyson was almost mythical back then. Now, this is my younger years, but I remember how big of a star Tyson was. And when he lost that fight, my whole neighborhood in New Jersey was talking about it. People on the elevator, people walking outside, people walking to and from school, grown people, teachers were talking about it. So Tyson was a big star back in the late 80s and the early 90s. He's still a big star now. So put that in perspective. He is still a huge star now. There's still an aura around Tyson that people will flock to see him. And he got his ass thoroughly whipped that night versus James Buster Douglas. We broke that fight down. It was in terms of in-ring action, I felt was a masterpiece by James Buster Douglas. The way he jabbed and moved and popped his right hand in there showed no fear of Mike Tyson, who was a 42-1 underdog. Showed no fear. And we're talking about he just lost his mom. So we definitely give Buster all the credit in the world for pulling off, again, probably the biggest upset in professional sports. And when I think of upsets, if you look at boxing upsets, you can think of Andy Ruiz versus Anthony Joshua 1. You can think of Hakeem Rahman and Lennox Lewis 1. To me, this is bigger because as big of a champion that Lewis was, at that time, he wasn't really beloved by American fans, neither was Anthony Joshua. I go back to, I'm going to equate this to that in Lake Placid in 1980 or 1981, that U.S. Olympic hockey team that beat the juggernaut Soviet team. I would say those are the two, and of course I watched documentaries and shows on that. So when you look at upsets, and I believe the famous call, can you call it, is it a miracle? Yes, by Al Michaels. Tyson Douglas really shook up the boxing world because people make the argument that Tyson was never the same ever again because he lost that aura of invincibility, where people were thinking Mike Tyson, and I believe what Max Kellerman said, the distant past that people thought Mike Tyson would eventually go down as possibly one of the greatest fighters of all time in the same league of Muhammad Ali, of a Rocky Marciano. Like, people really thought that, what we think of Floyd Mayweather now. And for him to get thoroughly destroyed, and it wasn't a lucky punch. We know how boxing, especially heavyweight boxing, a fight can end with one punch. This was a thorough beatdown for a long period of time. And 10 rounds, Buster Douglas pretty much won every single round except the round in which he was knocked down, and that was the 8th round. And to be honest with you, he was winning that round. He just got caught with a good uppercut. So we definitely had to cover the 30th anniversary of that fight. Folks, a classic fight. Buster Douglas did a great job, and it's something that until the end of time, that'll be seen as the biggest upset in heavyweight boxing championship history, really in boxing history, and you can make an argument in sports history. 42-1, had no business being there, was really supposed to be a stepping stone so Tyson can fight Evander Holyfield. Now, Holyfield was actually in the crowd that night. So definitely it's something that we had to cover, something that we enjoyed watching again to really break that fight down. HBO in their legendary fight series actually did something on Tyson and Douglas, and it was and we're talking 2003, 2002, when this documentary was made, and it's something that we had to give our take on it. Then we had a huge heavyweight fight between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, the rematch of their classic battle a year and a half prior. Now, we remember that fight because, understand something, Tyson Fury was the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. And we've explained what lineal was, and we'll go ahead and we'll do it again. Lineal, line. You follow the lineage. Pretty much, guy A is a champion, guy B beats guy A, guy C beats champion B, champion D beats champion C, Tyson Fury beats champion D. So if you trace the line, trace the lineage, trace the man who beat the man who beat the man, Tyson Fury was seen as the lineal heavyweight champion of the world because he beat Vladimir Klitschko, who was seen as the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. Now, it was a break in that because Lennox Lewis actually retired as the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, and Klitschko was seen as the best of those heavyweights. So it's something where I think Fury, being the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, retiring because he beat Vladimir Klitschko, he retires. There's kind of a vacuum at the top, and it came down between American Deontay Wilder and other fighter from Great Britain, Anthony Joshua. So Wilder was seen as a knockout puncher, and Fury, coming out of retirement, obviously due to mental issues, weight gain, drug use, coming out of retirement, fought 2 warm-up fights. Takes a great fight with Deontay Wilder. I thought fought an excellent fight. At times outboxed Wilder because always been a question of Wilder's actually skill set and a lot of the flaws in his mechanics that was really exposed in that fight. And it's really exposed in a lot of Deontay's other fights, but Deontay has a knockout power that's a great equalizer. In the first fight, again, being outboxed, Wilder scores 2 knockdowns. In the last round, you would think he knocked Tyson Fury flat out. He gets about a count of 9. I thought actually won the rest of the way. So now we have the rematch, and in a thorough thrashing, Tyson Fury, completes a comeback to knock out Deontay Wilder with TKO. His corner threw the towel in, and I feel it was well deserved. Because if I remember that fight correctly, I did not give Deontay Wilder not 1 round. Fury was much more aggressive. He got with the people from Crawl Gym. He was very aggressive, took the fight to Wilder, neutralized his power, and pretty much beat him up, scored 2 knockdowns. Now, there's questions of gloves and whether Fury had an unfair advantage, but from what I saw in the ring, clearly a dominant performance by Tyson Fury to recapture the WBC championship and also to reclaim his status as a top heavyweight in the world. So, which leads us to the next story. Deontay Wilder, after that fight, making plenty of excuses. Now, I understand from a psychological standpoint that fight really damaged Deontay, And if you really want to understand what that does to a fighter when a fighter doubts himself, go look at Rocky 3. I know when you look at Rocky 3, you think of Mr. T and I pity the fool and everything else that Mr. T said. But if you go back and watch that movie when Rocky was training with Apollo and Rocky was doubting himself and Apollo was cursing him out and, Adrian went to talk to him and he told Adrian that he was afraid and the first time he was truly doubting himself. In a way, Deontay was exhibiting the same behavior because this is a guy who was undefeated, knocking everybody out who they put in front of him, literally knocking everybody out, and came with a boatload of excuses. And the next story we did was Deontay Wilder, wrong priorities, but plenty of excuses. This man was blaming everything from the ring costume, literally the costume that he wore to the ring, weakened his legs. It went to Mark Breland, the trainer, throwing a towel in, and Tyson Fury cheating. I mean, it was just excuse after excuse after excuse. And we love Deontay, but what we're telling Deontay is if he has the discipline to tighten up on his mechanics, to really hone his craft, how would he fare in a rematch? Because his limitations really were exposed in that rematch. And in the trilogy, he's really going to have to tighten up on his game, and we don't know if he's willing to do that because in his corner you have a great Olympian, a great professional fighter in Mark Breland, who was as technically sound as they came, and clearly you're throwing him under the bus for doing his job to save his fighter, who pretty much standing no chance of winning the fight, and watching this fighter pretty much getting battered from pillar to post. And with your lack of improvement in your mechanics shows you clearly not listening to Mark Breland. So that's something where Wilder is going to have to humble himself. He doesn't really seem to be humble because I still watch interviews now and he's still coming up with excuses. He still has things to say about this fight instead of going back to the drawing board and laying low. So we definitely had to cover that at that time it happened. We did a story on Dak Prescott, understanding one's worth. And we talked about, at that time, the contract talks with Dak and the Cowboys came to an impasse. And we see now fast forward what happened during the season. Dak Prescott breaks his leg. He's out for the season. And now his value has actually gone up when not playing. And we actually titled this, Dak Prescott, Understanding One's Worth. And you know how we feel about paying pro athletes. These guys put their bodies on the line. They generate a lot of ticket sales. They generate a lot of money, especially television revenue. The reason why people go to the games, not COVID notwithstanding, but the reason why that people go to games, the reason why we tune in, the reason why we pay for NFL Sunday Ticket is to watch these guys, to watch them entertain us. So they are the reasons why we are glued to the television every single Sunday. And Dak Prescott should get his money, and he deserves every dime of his money. And we said this even before the injury because, again, the Cowboys had no problem giving Tony Romo not one but two contracts. And at that time, Tony Romo wasn't really that much more accomplished than Dak. So we felt that Dak should understand his worth and should get his money, and how prophetic it was that he ended up getting hurt, and now his contract value has actually gone up. So, hey, it is what it is, but definitely something to check out. We then began our top 10 fighters of all time list. And we had to begin with honorable mention because to put that list together was not the easiest thing. And we started off with about 20, 25 fighters on that list. And we said, you know what, we can do a top 20 list, but we wanted it to be hard. We definitely wanted it to make it a hard list where that's something where we had to remove some fighters who we truly, truly love, and we really had to sit and break it down. Now, that's not even just including the fighters, that's also ranking the fighters. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to do is ranking the fighters. So we decided to, with our 20 to 25, let's chop it down to 10. So when we chopped it down to 10, then we thought to ourselves, okay, well, let's do 5 honorable mention. We definitely want to pay our respect to these guys. So we wanted to start off with 5 honorable mention fighters, and then before we get into our top 10. And again, ranking these guys, who do you put in there? Why do you put in there? It's not easy. But again, it's not meant to be easy. It's meant to spark good debate discussion. And it's our list, and we feel how we feel about our list. So we already did a broadcast on Canelo Alvarez in honorable mention. We did one on Juan Manuel Marquez. the underrated great Mexican featherweight of his time frame, who competed in the same time as Erik Morales, as Marco Antonio Barrera, who is Manny Pacquiao's toughest opponent, Miguel Cotto, Oscar De La Hoya, and the aforementioned Mike Tyson. Those were honorable mention. People, were kind of questioning why wasn't Tyson in my top 10, and I can easily defend that all day long. When you're part on the losing end of the biggest upset in boxing history, you kind of can't get placed on too many top 10 lists in terms of greatest fighters of all time. So we went to our top 10 lists, and we'll go from 10 all the way to 1. Julio Cesar Chavez, Sr. Now, we recently just did a fantasy matchup between another person on the list, and we'll get to his name in a second, and we feel that will be an all-time classic fight. Now, with Chavez, he clearly has a record. We watched him grow up with a bunch of those wins. Our knocks on Chavez was that in the two biggest fights that we saw him in, against Meldrick Taylor as well as Pernell Whitaker, were fights that he was losing. In the case of the Taylor fight, was given a gift stoppage. In the case of the Whitaker fight, he was given a gift draw. But it doesn't take anything away from the other guys that he's beaten. Chavez clearly is Mexico's greatest boxer. Some people might say Salvador Sanchez, but at least in my lifetime, would be Julio Cesar Chavez, and I believe most people will agree. For number 9, I had to pick not one, but 2 fighters because it's hard to rank which one. Marco Antonio Barrera and Erik Morales. And out of the two, we were more of a Barrera guy, but we give Morales all the credit in the world because these two guys, they legitimately hit each other coming from different sides of the track. You have Morales coming from rough and gritty Tijuana, while Barrera comes from affluent Mexico City. So you had that bit of the, different cultures, even within Mexico. They genuinely did not like each other. Their 3 fights are some of the greatest wars in boxing history, specifically the first and the third fight, considering all the circumstances behind it. So we give these guys credit. Now, the reason why it was hard to put one over the other, because even though Barrera has 2 out of 3 victories against Morales, and it's funny, the first fight, Morales won the first fight. The second fight, Morales won the first fight, even though people feel that Barrera won the first fight, and Barrera won the second and the third fight. Many people believe that Morales actually won the second fight. So they were split on the first fight, and Barrera won the last one to go up to win 2 out of 3 in the trilogy. Now, the innocent thing is, Morales has victories over the fighters that Barrera never beat, namely Manny Pacquiao and Junior Jones. So it was hard to really, and his resume is just as good as Barrera. Now, Barrera has the high-profile wins, again, the 2 against Morales and the 1 against Prince Naazim Hamed, but it was hard to place one over the other because their resumes are really the same. And again, Morales has victories and dominant victories over the guys who dominated Barrera, so it was something worth going over. Number 8, Felix Trinidad. Definitely an action-packed fighter. Tito, on any list that I have with Tito, he's definitely on it. On my fantasy matchup, I listed him versus Canelo Alvarez, and people overwhelmingly think that Tito will win that fight, no questions asked. So Tito, and he definitely seems to be a fan of our program, because even on Twitter, when I put his name up, when I did the program on Tito, I sent it to him. He liked it, he replied. When I did the fantasy matchup, he liked it, he replied, he retweeted it. So Tito seems to be, he likes to see his name, on what we do on Twitter. So Tito definitely enjoys it. Number 7, Roy Jones Jr. Folks, do not be confused by the Roy Jones Jr. that you saw in the ring against Mike Tyson. I named his program Poetry in the Ring, because that's literally what Roy Jones was Poetry in the Ring. He definitely was a sight to behold. Definitely did things that no other fighter has done. It's a tale of how do you judge Roy Jones? Do you judge Roy Jones to a certain time and take the rest of his career? Because he really peaked in 2003 when he won a version of the heavyweight championship by beating a top 5 heavyweight in John Ruiz. You can make an argument top 3 heavyweight. And this is a guy who started off his career as a middleweight champion. So what he did was a feat that was not accomplished in 100 years. A year later, he's getting knocked out by Antonio Tarver to lose light heavyweight championship. And from that point on, Roy was never the same fighter again. But pretty much Roy Jones from the 90s was the best fighter of the 1990s. can make an argument maybe Trinidad, Sweet Pea Whittaker. But from the 90s, Roy Jones is seen as a consensus best fighter of the 90s, most dominant fighter of the 90s, with wins over both Bernard Hopkins as well as James Toney. And Roy was so good, he made other fighters look very amateurish. There was always a question about his opposition, but he silenced all that by beating John Ruiz, who was a tough heavyweight when nobody was really beating John Ruiz like that. And this is jumping up 2 weight classes from light heavyweight, skipping over cruiserweight, and going up to heavyweight and winning the WBA heavyweight championship of the world. So Roy Jones came at number 7. Coming in at number 6, Pernell Sweet Pea Whittaker, boxing's own sweetness, the late Sweet Pea. And we loved us some Sweet Pea Whittaker. He definitely was another one. I mean, sweet in the ring, the reflexes, the speed, the defense, the ability to avoid punches. He's a southpaw, and I'm a southpaw. Love watching Sweet Pea. I definitely miss Sweet Pea, and he's another one. We definitely need to get him on some fantasy matchups. Even the great Floyd Mayweather has Pernell Whittaker as one of his top all-time fighters. Number 5, Evander Holyfield. What else can you say? Heart and soul, the Lord's pugilist, and that's exactly what Holyfield was. This is a man who, in his only 11th or 12th fight, became the cruiserweight champion of the world, and an excellent classic fight versus Dwight Muhammad Qawi, who was a tough guy, and Holyfield beat him at a relatively young age, moved up to heavyweight, knocked out Buster Douglas to become the new heavyweight champion of the world, and by the way, the same Buster Douglas who knocked out Mike Tyson. So Beast Buster Douglas had wars against George Foreman, against Smoking Bird Cooper, against Riddick Bowe, against Michael Moore, coming back from a bad heart. Losing 2 out of 3 to Bowe, getting knocked out by Bowe in 95, coming back a year later to beat up Mike Tyson. Oh, by the way, Holyfield was a 25-1 underdog in that fight. Well, the odds started off as 25-1, I believe. By the time it was fight night, the odds were 9-1, 6-1 Tyson. Holyfield beats him up good, ties him up, has a perfect side to beat Tyson, is not afraid of Iron Mike. We know what happened in the rematch. So Holyfield, when they call this man the Warrior, he truly is a warrior. He definitely came in at number 5. At number 4, Lennox Lewis. Believe it or not, on this list, the most underrated fighter on this list, and the most unappreciated fighter. And we say to this, Lennox Lewis established himself as the best heavyweight of his time, beating Evander Holyfield with ease twice, knocking out Mike Tyson, beating every heavyweight who he stepped into the ring with. And we said this before and we'll say it again. If Lennox Lewis was an American-born heavyweight champion, he would have gotten more praise and credit and respect. He's getting it now because you see what the heavyweight division has become. I think when Lennox left the sport and we saw what the heavyweight division became, no knock on the Klitschko's, the void left by Lewis actually grew his respect amongst boxing fans, because for a long time, people did not like this man. I wasn't the biggest Lennox fan myself, but I respected what he did, the fighter he became, especially with the late Emmanuel Stewart in his corner. And it's something that we definitely wanted to rank Lewis high, because he definitely deserves that ranking. He is one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time. And you mean to tell me at 6'5", 240, 245 pounds, maybe 250, with a knockout right hand, Lewis would be favored in any mythical or fantasy heavyweight championship matchup. He should be favored in every single fight. Based on his skill set, his trainer, his dedication, he will be favored in most of those fights. So definitely had Lewis at number 4. Coming in at number 3, Bernard the Executioner Hopkins. My personal favorite fighter, long reigning middleweight champion, making the move up to light heavyweight to capture the light heavyweight title, beating Antonio Tarver, the guy who pretty much had Roy Jones' number, winning the Lanier middleweight title, winning the Lanier light heavyweight title, something that Sugar Ray Robinson couldn't even do, and master craftsman, dedicated to discipline, still fighting on a competitive level at the age of 48, 49. So we definitely had to have B-Hop on the list. Number 2, Manny Pacquiao. We just did his fantasy matchup versus Julio Cesar Chavez. Manny Pacquiao, the Typhoon out of the Pacific, no questions asked. And number 1, it wasn't even a debate or discussion about number 1. Floyd Mayweather. I mean, I don't know why he's partaking in these little BS boxing exhibitions, but that's conversation for another day. That's conversation for 2021. But Floyd Mayweather, the unsolvable equation, that's exactly what he was. By far, the best fighter who I watched in my entire lifetime. No questions asked. I mean, this guy could do it all in the ring. The perfect fighter. I mean, you couldn't touch him. Perfect blend of speed, athleticism, jab, boxing IQ, defense, chin, everything. Nobody could touch this guy, so we're proud to bring the careers of these top fighters to you all and want you to relive their greatness. We had people reaching out to us after we talked about these fighters saying, hey man, I went back and I watched old fights and such and such. I didn't realize he was that good, or I heard of him, man, but you know me, the way you broke it down, I feel like I had to go back and watch a lot of his fights. And they became fans of these guys. So that's definitely what we like to do. Staying in the boxing world, we lost two good trainers. We lost the uncle of the aforementioned Floyd Mayweather, Roger Black Mamba Mayweather, who was a great fighter in his own right, a great trainer, definitely trained Floyd. And we lost a trainer up in Hopkins, the late brother Naazim Richardson. So we definitely had to pay them our respects. These were some good brothers. Roger Mayweather was funny. Brother Naazim spoke the truth. He was a passionate speaker. You believe everything that he said. So we definitely had to talk about that. We had to cover the sports media, their hypocrisy. Now, ESPN, they did a documentary on the Chicago Bulls called The Last Dance. And it was covering that final year of the Chicago Bulls dynasty. But it was a well-done documentary, a 10-part series. Definitely reignited the debate as to who is the GOAT, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. That's a conversation for another day. And people, people are dug in on both sides, especially on Twitter, which I don't have a problem with that. We should be able to have a healthy debate, a healthy discussion without no pointless name calling. Now, we had an issue with the mainstream sports media because there always seems to cover up Michael Jordan's behavior, whether it's bullying teammates, bashing teammates, and anything like that. And people were okay with that because he won. And I'm like, but wait a minute. You had an issue with Rich Incognito bullying a teammate, and it became all these anti-bullying campaigns, and people had a problem with it. But when it came to Michael Jordan, he gets a pass on that. So we had a bit of an issue with that. We had a bit of an issue with people not wanting athletes to get involved in sports, but they want them to get involved in sports. But then when Michael Jordan says that Republicans buy sneakers too, and I find that funny because if LeBron James said Republicans buy sneakers too, there'll be backlash because they want black people to be voting for a specific political party. But it seems that when it's Michael Jordan involved, he gets a pass on everything. So that's something that we had to cover on the sports media hypocrisy in their coverage of Michael Jordan. They have the issues with bullying when it comes to the people, but when it's Mike, that's okay, because he was driven to win and driven to be the best, and sometimes you just rub people the wrong way. They're okay with that. They were okay with him, Republicans buy sneakers, and my issue with Mike was supporting a candidate or not supporting a black man against a candidate who did not want to vote for Dr. King's birthday to be a holiday. So that's where I had my issue with that, but yet the mainstream sports media were coming from Mike, and I feel in all his behavior. Then we're going to do a combine here. Then we jump into our social justice weekend, and we're going to hold off on that until the very end. We then did our Mike Tyson and Roy Jones preview, definitely previewing that fight between the two great champions. Of course, we definitely relived their career, and it's something that we were not fans of the fight. We made it very clear that we weren't fans of the fight. Why? Because we saw both guys at their best, and we saw them at their worst, especially their eventual decline in the ring, as Father Time is undefeated. But we had issues with that. People trying to see them in the ring. They signed for the fight. Obviously, the fight was a financial success. Now, Evander Holyfield was come out of retirement, but we weren't big fans of that. Definitely wasn't a very aesthetically pleasing fight, but it's something that the public wanted, the public enjoyed. We feel it's a mockery of the sport, but hey, it is what it is. We didn't pay for the fight, and we saw these guys at their best. And with boxing, with the young stars that they have in boxing, we should not keep reaching back for nostalgia with some of these issues that's plaguing, I don't know, a company like the WWE now. You're reaching back for old stars, but you have not done enough to market new stars. So what is boxing doing to market some of these new stars? That's what the problem is. We had to do a show on Daniel Cormier, the former UFC heavyweight champion and former UFC light heavyweight champion of the world. And we had to touch on the career of Daniel Cormier, who called it a career, who I feel is an underrated GOAT, and he is only second best of his era to one Jon Jones. And this is a guy who I think he could beat most other fighters on the planet except Jon Jones. And I don't think DC really gets mentioned because you always hear the Gracies and Jones and Conor McGregor, Jose Aldo, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, Khabib now. So you generally hear these names first. Ken Shamrock. You generally hear these names first, Randy Couture, before you get to Daniel Cormier. And I was like, I can make an argument looking at Cormier's resume. He has a GOAT discussion resume. Now, again, he happens to be the second best fighter, especially in the light heavyweight division, after Jon Jones. Again, styles make fights, and I think Jones just has the style to always give Cormier problems, drug tests be damned. But it doesn't take anything away from what Cormier has done in the octagon, so we felt we had to cover that. We then introduced our fantasy matchups. We did a first fantasy matchup with Riddick Bowe versus Lennox Lewis, Felix Trinidad versus Canelo Alvarez, Bernard Hopkins versus James Toney, and the recent one we did with Manny Pacquiao and Julio Cesar Chavez. So it's something that, we always hear about these fantasy matchups at barbershops, at gyms, who would win between who and stuff like that, and it definitely sparks an argument, it sparks a debate, it sparks a discussion amongst boxing fans, and that's definitely what we wanted to do. We definitely had a good Twitter poll that a lot of people voted for Felix Trinidad versus Canelo Alvarez, overwhelmingly for Tito, so people clearly love this stuff, and it's something that we definitely enjoy doing. Speaking of young boxing stars, we had a new one crowned this year in Teofimo Lopez. Teofimo Lopez beating Vasily Lomachenko, who was maybe one of the greatest Olympians ever to come into boxing. And this kid really took the fight to Vasily Lomachenko, pretty much outboxing him from the beginning. As the tide started to turn and Lomachenko made his adjustments, I felt that Teofimo Lopez won the last round, did everything that he was supposed to do, and won that fight fair and square. So in boxing, there is a new star. He definitely has potential to be a star. And when I tell you boxing is in great hands, I really believe that boxing is in great hands. You just had, and of course we missed a lot of our boxing coverage, but you had Errol Spence, who just dominated Danny Swift Garcia. I'm talking about, if you know anything about Danny Garcia, he's no pushover. And Spence pretty much whipped him for 12 rounds. You have guys like Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford, and that's a fight that people want to see. Shakur Stevenson, Gervonta Tank Davis. You got Gary Russell, you got Devin Haney, you got Ryan Garcia. You have a bunch of young talent stars in boxing that these promoters really need to start promoting these guys, start getting out to these networks, having these guys fight each other. I think, and I mentioned this before, a product of the Floyd Mayweather effect has been, if you lose a fight, then you're not that good. And it's not Floyd's fault. He did everything he could do to protect his record, and that pretty much is what made him marketable and bankable, is that people pay for Mayweather fights, some of us to watch his greatness, others of us to watch him lose. So because of that, now we still have the Mayweather hangover where if you lose a fight, then you're not that good. And I said it before, even though if Lomachenko loses that fight, or whoever lost that fight, doesn't take away from them as a fighter. And there's a potential for a rematch. Like my little brother Wes said, he actually would pick Lomachenko in a rematch because Lomachenko knows that he has to take the fight to Lopez. And when he did take the fight to Lopez, he actually won plenty of rounds. But I respect the kid for actually sucking it up in that 12th round when the momentum was starting to get away from him and taking the momentum back in that 12th round. So definitely we saw the birth of a new star. We definitely saw the birth of a new star in professional boxing. Now lastly, the COVID. Now, we definitely used to send our well wishes on every broadcast because we meant what we said about dealing with this COVID. Of course, I deal with it every day when we go out to the store, you go to work. So, of course, I had to be mindful of COVID, knowing how stressful things were. It's something that we all had to deal with. So we just wanted to send our well wish to everybody. Now, lastly, 2020 became the year of, quote, social and racial justice. And we covered this before. With the death of George Floyd, who was a junkie, all of a sudden now people became what I call social justice weekend warriors. You had NBA players jumping on bandwagons and sports players jumping on bandwagons, and they have a right to do that, but we have a right to call them out. We have a right to call them out because when I'm looking at black children dying in the street, nobody's saying anything. I have white people all of a sudden, now it's not about being racist, it's about telling like it is. I have white folks all of a sudden who have now discovered black pain, and now all of a sudden they're holding up Black Lives Matter flags and Black Lives Matter, signs, and our issue with that is you can tear down whatever statue you want to tear down. You can burn up whatever Confederate flag you want to burn up. You can destroy Stone Mountain. You can tear down Robert E. Lee statues and rename schools and all that's fine. The thing that nobody's talking about is where's the money. And like what I propose in that first Social Justice Weekend Warriors is let's take half of the wealth of America. So if we take the collective wealth of America and let's throw an even number on there, let's say it's $10 trillion. We're going to take $10 trillion, half of that money, $5 trillion, and move it to black America. You will see how liberal some of these white folks really are when we start talking about moving money around. I'm not into symbolism. I'm not a Johnny come lately. This is nothing that I just jumped on like the majority of people, your so-called LGBT and feminists. This is nothing that I jump on. This is something that I've been living this and talking this for a long time about some of the injustices out here in this world, especially in the world of professional sports. So it became about systematic racism. So again, if we want to eradicate systematic racism, like I tell people, the way to insulate yourself from racism is building your economy. By building your economy, let's take half of America's wealth, let's move it to black America, and we'll see about insulating ourselves from institutional racism. But of course, when I talk about that money, all of a sudden signs start getting folded up and start getting crumpled up and t-shirts start coming off. So we had our issue with that. Then we did one about the disrespect of the black male. And our issues with that was you have a situation where people who generally don't respect black men, namely black women, namely certain white folks, have utter contempt and disrespect for a black man, but yet only when you're shot and killed by the police. And we know that the numbers of just hunting down black people in the middle of the street, that's a lie. And I was able to show you those numbers, and please check out that broadcast. So again, the disrespect that black men face in America from all sides, black women and pretty much every other group. And now all of a sudden, only when you get shot and killed by the police is all of a sudden they love you. And I had an issue during election time. Now, this is not about who you vote for, but the tactics of trying to get black men to vote, i.e. using strippers to go to the polls, strippers talking about life choices, again, strippers giving you advice on life choices. I had an issue with that, and that was targeted towards black men. You have people attacking one's blackness because you don't vote for a particular party or a particular candidate. But you would never stand in front of a Jew. You would never stand in front of an Asian. You would never stand in front of an LGBT and tell them, well, you're not LGBT if you don't vote for this party. You don't have people like Chelsea Handler telling a black man that I had to remind him that he's black because he happens to be a supporter of the opposing candidate. I had a serious problem with that. That's why I'm starting to find white liberals and I look at them with utter disgust. Even Dr. King did as well. And because I see how they truly put us into one big nigga boat. And we had an issue with that. It's something that we had to call that out. And it's something that we will continue to call it out while now everybody has forgotten about black pain and black struggle. So in the year of 2021, we're going to call some of these folks out. We're still going to call out the Chelsea Handlers and everybody who had the nerve to say that if you don't vote for somebody or a particular party that you're not black. We're going to call out the LGBT and their agenda of trying to feminize black males. I've been saying this for a long time, And I've had an issue with that, and nobody seems to be outraged by that. We're going to call out the Black Lives Matter people because Black Lives Matter received a lot of money from people this year, and I've heard stories upwards of $10 billion, and I haven't seen that one dime of that money going back to the inner city where the people who you claim to love so much should benefit from that money, and yet that money is not going inside the inner cities. I'm still saying schools closed. What businesses are being built by the money that was donated to Black Lives Matter. So we're going to continue to call these people out, as well as these feminists who, again, have no respect for black men. I don't need a man, but yet all of a sudden they want to jump on pictures and picket lines to now be down for the cause. So this is something that we're going to continue to call these people out. And on another note, to every police officer in America, if you're listening right now, for every family member who cussed you out during 2020, for every family member who called you a murderer, even though you had nothing to do with what was going on, when they try to slither back into your life in 2021 and 2022, tell them to kiss your ass and go to hell. Because I say this, the year of 2020 has been a year of revelation. It's been a year of honesty, and people let you know how you feel. And that's a good thing. You want people to let you know how you feel. And cut these bastards off and go do what you gotta do. So when folks start to slither back into your life in 2021, all of a sudden it's, hey, can we put it past us? Or when they get pulled over, not even want your help again, remind them of the summer of 2020. Just putting it out there. So this is our year in review. We definitely enjoy talking about some of the topics that we talked about. We're going to continue to talk about these topics in 2021. So from Chin Check Radio to you all, happy holidays and happy new year. And until the next time, and we'll see you next year.